Hello, and thank you for joining us for a little intro on behavior. My name is Julie Aiello, and I am a board certified behavior analyst, or BCBA. We're going to talk about behavior today, obviously. And the word behavior exists out there in the world. Everyone here has probably heard it before. But what does it actually mean? For behavior analysts, behavior is anything that is observable and measurable at the same time. Oftentimes, when we hear the term behavior, it is implied that this is a bad thing or that there's malintent. An important mind shift to make is that we all, as humans, have behaviors that we engage in literally all day long. If you take a moment and you pay attention to even the slightest and smallest observable and measurable movements that you personally make, you'll start to see just how many behaviors you actually have. Some of these are larger ones, like you empty the dishwasher, or you walk to your car to go to work in the morning, or you sit down at your desk and start typing. Those are pretty overt behaviors. Others might be tapping your toe. It could be twirling your pen during meetings. It could be doodling. Those are all behaviors that you have developed over time. And everybody has these. They're tools that people develop that sometimes even become almost unnoticeable to get things done or to get through things that might be difficult. Analysts spend a lot of time looking at behaviors, and we do that to try to figure out why people are doing what they're doing so that we can figure out how to teach them new skills to help them be more independent and successful. In the field of ABA, there are four main what we call functions of behavior, or the jobs that the behaviors fulfill. There's attention, there's access to something, there's escape or avoiding of something, and then there's automatic or sensory input. So what does that look like in practice? First of all, a behavior can tell us what someone wants. So when we talk about what someone wants to gain access to, we usually mean attention or access to something specific, so an item of some sort. Quick note to remember, when we talk about attention, and this is a big one, attention doesn't necessarily mean something warm and fuzzy. It could, but that typically isn't always the case. Think about it. If a child repeatedly does something wrong, an adult will repeatedly correct them or scold them or reprimand them, right? And every single time they do that wrong thing, they get this response, so they're getting a lot of attention. Whereas if they consistently do the right thing, they don't consistently get the response that you want. You might ask them to wait, you might not attend, whatever. For really young kids, it is often the case that they don't actually really know how to get someone's attention effectively. And they've learned now through trial and error that doing the wrong thing, hitting somebody, calling out, pushing somebody, whatever the case may be, pretty consistently gets them attention. And so they might stick with those behaviors because they're really effective. Or you might have a kid who seems to want to play with other kids, but always seems to jump into the middle of a game loud and boisterously. Or maybe when they want to engage with a peer, they pull their hair to get their attention. They are looking for ways to get attention in ways that they know and ways that have been and still are being consistently reinforced. This is why it is so very much so important that we work on catching kids being good and point that out to them a lot, especially our youngest learners, right? So you have Johnny in your class. He's raising his hand in class. Instead of calling out, you say, "Nice job raising your hand," and call on him first. If the next time a question is asked, Johnny calls out, you just kind of ignore him and call on Susie instead, who has her hand raised, right? So now the attention isn't being given for that behavior. It's being given for the alternate behavior that you've taught him. A behavior can also tell us what someone does not want. These behaviors are usually pretty obvious, especially with little kids, right? So you might see some, we're asking you to do a task you don't like, so you tend to run away when you get asked to do that. You're giving an older child extra homework and they're just whining and complaining, whatever the case may be. Let's think back to Johnny, our little guy who's working on raising his hand. And this time, imagine that he is consistently calling out during group time on the rug. So not far from the scenario we were just talking about. All the kids are sitting on the floor and you're thinking to yourself, wow, Johnny is having a great day so far. He hasn't called out. He's sitting nicely. He's answering questions correctly. So you start reading a story and then he starts yelling out the answers and interrupting throughout your read aloud. You as the teacher have to stop and remind him to raise his hand and to wait a few times. And you finally have him leave the rug altogether and have him go sit at a nearby table. Okay? All right. What just happened? It is entirely possible that Johnny did indeed want attention, and he got it every single time he called out. It is also entirely possible that Johnny really doesn't like sitting on the rug, which I'm sure you see with a lot of your kiddos. Sometimes sitting on the rug is physically difficult. My son was like that. He had a really hard time keeping his body in space. Sometimes a structured seat is more helpful, and some kids want that. And when this kid, Johnny, persisted in calling out, he's often being redirected to go sit in a chair, which gets him out of an uncomfortable situation. So he was getting one behavior that was getting two functions. He was getting attention that he wanted, and he was getting away from an aversive stimuli or that feeling of being uncomfortable, right? Two functions, one behavior. Humans are a complicated species. That much is true. But kind of understanding what the reinforcement is for behaviors does help us to try to change things around a little bit. It's really important to look at what a behavior might be telling us. It is equally as important to take a step back and figure out why the behavior in question occurred when it occurred. We know why it might be happening, but why is it happening at that moment in time? Remember, one singular behavior could have different jobs, and that is true for all humans. We all may engage in the same behavior to get access to different things or get away from different things. The way to tease that part out is to look at all of the influences on a behavior. So the first one is big, the environment. Look around your classrooms. They are set up in a way that is conducive to learning for really young kids. Ideally, these kids are learning through play, so they have access to those tools that they need when they are here. We do not exist as humans in a bubble, however. There are different environmental variables in every setting that we are in, so we need to be sure we're taking those into consideration. The biggest reason for this is that if we, as the teachers and the analysts and the behavior change experts, can identify specific environmental variables that tend to be related to specific behaviors, we can make some adjustments to those variables to try to change the behavior. So what does that mean? It means if Sally has difficulty attending to group instructions because she sits next to her bestie Janie and she's always talking to her, see if changing the seats around in group makes a difference. Or maybe give her a job during that time that doesn't feel like punishment, but does break her away from her friend. If Johnny does better settling into the classroom when it's dark and quiet instead of loud and boisterous, maybe let him come in 3 to 5 minutes earlier from recess than the rest of the class so that he experiences being successful at transitioning from recess back into the classroom. And ideas like this can be faded out over time or decreased over time as it seems to be effective. Maybe you've looked at the environment and you've made some adjustments like this and nothing has changed. Well, be sure you are also looking at potential patterns of behavior. A pattern might be something purposefully taught, such as an arrival routine, or it is something that has occurred over time and has access reinforcement over that time and solidified. Imagine you have a student, let's call him Leo, who is pretty independent. He's independently taking off his coat during arrival and he hangs it up. He independently takes out his water and his lunchbox. He can independently put them in the correct bin within the classroom. He can independently hang up his bag in his own cubby. He can independently wash his hands pretty thoroughly, and he can independently sign in. But when he is prompted to do them in the order that was set by the class, he gets upset. He keeps trying to barge into the classroom before he's even hung up his coat. He just leaves it on the floor. When he was first assessed, it seemed like he could do all of the required tasks without any help, so the teacher is left behind just scratching her head. What if? What if you stood back and just watched what he did for a day or two? Didn't tell him what to do, didn't correct him, just watched. Did you notice that he completed all of the tasks all by himself? Was he also ready to go at the same time as his classmates? Maybe the pattern of behavior that developed for him just developed in a different order than it did for his peers. And if it's not causing a problem, I say let it go. If it is, it's time to teach a new pattern. So what can you do when you start to see some behavioral issues? First of all, you don't want to make any assumptions about anything. Sometimes a child or an adult can just be having a bad day, right? What you want to look for is patterns of behavior that start to develop over time. When you have a behavior that is happening again and again and again, take a step back and start noticing around what time of day it happens, around who it seems to be happening. Take note if it's every day, every morning, only after snack, only around rug time. Then start thinking about what we call the ABCs. The ABCs for behaviors is the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. So this is the behaviors that happen, whatever happens right before the behavior itself, and then whatever happens right after, immediately after. Remember earlier when I said that some behaviors happen to gain access to attention? This is a great thing to be super mindful of when you're tracking ABCs of a behavior of concern. You might think that the consequence of Johnny calling out on the rug is losing access to the activity at the rug. But if you started tracking what was actually happening and you look at what happened immediately following the behavior, not 5 seconds later, 10 seconds later, 15 seconds later, but immediately following the behavior, it's really the teacher attending to Johnny, reminding him that he needs to wait his turn and now he will go back to his seat. So what is really likely initially maintaining Johnny's behavior? I would say attention. Also make sure that you have identified for yourself what behaviors you want to see. Don't just say, I don't want to see these things. Have a clear picture of what you want to see and reinforce those. I always recommend to teachers and to parents too, don't tell kids what not to do, tell them what to do. And then if they do the wrong thing, you can correct them by telling them again what to do, right? It is pretty common for kids to get pretty general praise, like, good job, great, good work, just here or there for doing the right thing, but then getting pretty immediate attention and correction and specific attention for doing the wrong thing. I told you to hang up your coat. Stop leaving your stuff on the floor. Like that kind of stuff, right? Pretty quick. As opposed to, oh, remember, we have to keep our things in our bin, right? For kids who like attention, why would they do the right thing, which may lead to some possible attention, when they could do the wrong thing and get pretty consistent attention every single time? So build a habit for yourself, if you don't already have one, of trying to catch kids being good and giving very specific praise. For a child that you see having some behavioral struggles, this may require more reinforcement for them specifically, so always try to start there. Reinforce those behaviors that you want more of. But sometimes the child continues to struggle. Now what? You can make some small environmental adjustments. Behaviors really truly are a reaction to the environment that surrounds us. For a child with behavioral struggles, let's think back to our friend Leo, right? We know that he can do all of the morning routine, okay? Maybe sometimes he forgets to step, or maybe sometimes he takes a beat longer than his peers and we need to get started with the day. I cannot stand here all day, Leo, and tell you what to do. You know what to do, right? And then on top of that, Leo might be one of those kids that gets upset when an adult verbally prompts him through things he knows how to do. Oh, how frustrating. He's not doing it. I'm telling him to do it. He's getting mad because I'm telling him to do it. He's doing it out of order. Why can't he just do it the way that I told him? Now everyone's frustrated. Leo's frustrated. I'm frustrated, right? Maybe we can make a small adjustment, right, to try to ease some of that frustration for everybody. Maybe something as simple as a visual chart, a simple checklist of all of the good things that he needs to do. So instead of, oh, good morning, Leo, so good to see you. Let's do this. Now let's do this. Now let's do this. It becomes, good morning, Leo. Please bring me your checklist when you're done. Hand it to him, maybe with a dry erase marker, and walk away. Give him some autonomy to do it. And sometimes, for some kids, that's super effective. For other kids, maybe it's a change in seating arrangement. Maybe we lower the lights during rug time. Maybe instead of sitting in rows on the rug, we try sitting in a circle. Maybe we change the morning schedule so the students listen to a story at their seats while starting snack instead of while sitting on the rug. Maybe we let Johnny take a few blocks to the rug or fidget. Or maybe we let him color at the rug while we're doing stories. Maybe Leo gets to be the line leader so that he gets to the classroom first, which gives him a little bit of extra time to start his routine, and maybe he'll start finishing on time. The key here is being flexible within reason and trying one thing at a time to gauge its success. So you have to give it a few days too. One other little point I can make on this is when you make these changes, sometimes it works pretty quickly and then you kind of fade out doing it, and then the behaviors come back. So try to be consistent over time. Sometimes we get a little bit of a honeymoon period that we just need to keep an eye on. Okay, so now your minds are spinning and the wheels are turning and you're thinking about all of the things you can make adjustments with and what students you think might benefit from them and what cool checklists you can make, which I totally get. I love all of that stuff. I have my laminator and my cool pens and all that fun stuff, all my Velcro. I get it, okay? But one thing that we haven't really touched a lot on yet, a little bit, remember when I mentioned a few slides back that behaviors are really reactions to things within the environment? One of the big things in the environment that people exist in are the people around them, okay? Ever been in a room with someone in a really bad mood? So maybe you are hanging out in a room and everything is going great, and then someone comes in who's just, could be a close friend of yours, and they're in a really bad mood. What does that do to the room? What does that do to your behavior? And why am I even saying any of these things? Well, One of the most powerful tools we have as educators of little people is our behavior. When we are working with kids, we have the opportunity to change what we are doing to lead to better outcomes for them. Meaning, if I change my behavior, it is likely that that will then change the child's behavior that I am currently working with. This is easier said than done. And I say that because you may have been doing the same thing for the past 10 years and it's been really effective. Why would you want to change it just for one kid if it seems to work really well for everybody? Something to think about, to mull over. If you were working in a preschool, a daycare, you're working in elementary school, you work with kids. People who work with kids are kind and compassionate. They have to think a lot on their toes. They have to be creative and they have to be caring. We don't need to make big changes, okay? But again, getting back to our friend Leo, let's say you greet all of the kids basically the same way, but for whatever reason, saying good morning, nice to see ya, that greeting seems to set Leo up for failure in the morning. He just seems to get grumpy when you say good morning. So you just ignore that. But in ignoring that, we are removing some of the attention component for that behavior, the grumbling or the refusal to respond or whatever the case may be, but we're not remedying it, okay? Meanwhile, we are also not allowing Leo to access success when it comes to morning greetings and arrival, and just like greetings with other people in general, right? So he's not successful at it. He's not being reinforced for it, for whatever the behavior is. He's not being taught a new behavior, okay? And just like walking into a room when someone is in a really bad mood can change the tone for your entire day, this inaccess to success first thing in the morning can set the tone poorly for Leo. Now you might say, well, then he shouldn't be so grumpy when he comes in. Sure, but we're the educators, right? We want to educate him. So here's what we could do. Instead of greeting him similarly to how you might greet the other kids, you might wave to let him know that you were there, but you don't have to say anything. Maybe you just hand him the checklist for getting ready, okay? Once he knows what it is for, obviously, you want to teach him what it is. Maybe teach him in the afternoons, have him practice, and then in the morning, just wave when he gets there and hand him the checklist, okay? Maybe you wait until he's approached you to give him a greeting. You don't go up to him. And if he does that, you heavily reinforce that. Oh, it's so nice to see you. Thank you so much for saying hi to me. It's so nice to talk to you, right? For our friend Johnny calling out on the rug, maybe you give him a job. Maybe you call on him before he has a chance to call out. Maybe you have him sit next to you. Maybe you just ignore him altogether unless he raises his hand, and then you always call on him first. Maybe you give him a choice of where to sit when it's story time, okay? There are so many options of little tweaks that we can make and so little time to talk about them all, but there's lots and lots of options. And the real key here is that you want to make sure that you're meeting the child where they're at. Just like we do when we're teaching academics, we meet the children where they're at. Behaviorally, it should be the same way, okay? See if you can figure out why they're doing what they're doing and change your behavior towards them to make an impact on how they behave. With specific behavioral problems that arise, this is an actually super powerful tool that you just need to take a tiny step back and a second to figure out what to change of your behavior, or ask someone else to come in and look and give you some recommendations. Oftentimes it's helpful to have a fresh set of eyes to give you that. Again, if we are successfully looking at those ABCs, the antecedents, the specific behavior, the specific consequences, we should be able to determine what is actually triggering the behavior and also what's maintaining it, and then we can try to change both. Okay, so here's just a breakdown of what we can do when we start to encounter those more difficult behaviors in the classroom. First is where we observe, right? First, we need to see it. We need to watch for the behavioral patterns to evolve. We need to see what's actually happening right before the behavior, right after the behavior, what the patterns really are. I have a sample ABC chart that you can use. There's a link to that below. You want to look to see what is documented. This will help you to really identify those patterns and help you have concrete information to really develop an effective plan rather than having you engage in trial and error. Okay. The next thing you want to do is clearly identify. Figure out exactly what the problem is. Not just that there's some misbehavior happening, but what is the actual problem? What is it in response to? Is it disrupting your class? Are they not accessing academics because of it? What is the actual problem? So again, let's remember our friends, Johnny and Leo. Johnny's behavior disrupts class and he misses out on activities. That's not great. And Leo's behavior is super frustrating, okay? But at the end of the day, he does do all of the steps, our friend Leo, right? So what should we actually be doing here? Or are we just prolonging a power struggle that isn't really necessary? Once you determine what the actual issue is and you have a clear definition of it, this really allows everyone to be on the same page as to what we need to work on to change to encourage success for our learners, right? So if Leo's behavior is just causing frustration with staff, which I can fully understand, but he's still getting the task done, is it really worth the struggle? Maybe not, right? If it's causing him not to be able to complete the routine effectively, then yes, it is, right? So really look at what's preventing him from being successful, not what's preventing us from being successful, which is not easy, right? You get into it because they're your students. Now we discover, once we have clearly identified what the actual issue is, we know what the behavior is, we know when and where it's likely to happen, but we still need to figure out exactly why it's happening, right? So we have an idea at this point. Remember, all behaviors serve a purpose. So if we can start to see why they are doing something, so we know when, we know in response to what, but we really need to know why. Is it attention seeking? Are we escaping, avoiding, whatever the case may be? What is that? If we can figure that out, the plan that we build is going to be that much more effective in helping to reduce the problem behavior and also potentially teach these kids some skills that will help them long term, which is ideal, I would imagine, right? The last thing we're going to do is adjust, okay? We solve the problem, on to the next thing. If only human beings were that simple. In reality, we need to be constantly monitoring and looking for behaviors, and if we are paying attention, we will start to see cracks in the foundation if the plan that we developed is starting not to work anymore, which happens all the time. It's no biggie, right? We can just adjust based on what is currently happening. So instead of having to scrap that and start all over again, we can fine tune. People are like machines with a lot of moving parts. Those parts are influenced by so many different outside variables. Sometimes the full moon affects classrooms. I'm sure every teacher will tell you that. So we have to be ready for that, and we need to be ready to have some tune-ups every now and then. Okay, some takeaways for you. Things you might already know. All kids learn differently. I'm sure you know that. It is so important to reiterate that, though, because no size fits all for teaching routines, for setting up structure, or for dealing with behaviors. Remember, you could have two students that have pretty similar behaviors, and those behaviors are doing two different jobs for each of those students. One might be letting this child get out of math class, and this because he hates math, and this other one could be getting more attention because they feel like they need more attention, right? So you really need to watch specific kids and what's going on around their behaviors. It's really important. Kids thrive with routines. I know I didn't actually say that before, and I also know I'm preaching to the choir, but this is more about how each individual kid thrives on a routine. And sometimes there is a problem behavior built into a routine, so it's important to then help them develop other effective routines to help get the job done. Okay, so that's why I say this as a reminder, because sometimes the routine is actually the behavior, so we need to kind of figure out how to break that cycle. And we do that sometimes by making small changes, because sometimes the smallest tweak is going to make the biggest difference. Again, I have nothing against fancy plans and laminated posters and stickers. I use them all the time. They're great. They're super useful. But save yourself the time and try to start with small changes before going big. A lot of times that is all that is really needed. Again, preaching to the choir, consistency is key. You have a child in your classroom with a problem behavior. You go through all of the steps. You find a plan that works, and it works for a while. And then last Tuesday, Sally came in, and the plan you've been using with her did not work. And you were so frustrated because you're a human being. And you threw up your hands and threw the plan out. Well, now the behavior was likely reinforced again, and Sally has found a way to get what she wants without having to work through it. Which doesn't mean that your plan isn't still going to work. I mean, you got to get it out of the trash and start over, right? What it really means, though, is that it will take a little while to decrease that behavior again. And what I mean by that is that if you've been engaging in a specific behavior plan with a specific behavior, and the behavior has kind of gone away a little bit, and let's say it's an attention-seeking behavior, and so you've gotten to the point where it doesn't happen, so you almost don't need to remind yourself to not attend to it or to prompt her to ask for attention in a different way. And then the behavior happens again after weeks of it not happening, and you attend to it. And you're just so frustrated. What did I just do? Why is this behavior here? That plan definitely didn't work. Actually, it did. We call that reemergence of a behavior like that. We call it an extinction burst, meaning that the behavior is still in that child's repertoire. People don't unlearn skills that they know. They don't unlearn tools that they have in their tool bag. However, sometimes these behaviors pop back up. And the issue with an extinction burst is that it's expected, except it happens when we're least expecting it. It tells us that our plan actually was working if the behavior pops back up. And oftentimes when the behavior pops back up, it does get reinforced. And the only thing that you really need to worry about is that, or be prepared for, isn't that you need a whole new plan, is that it's going to take a little while to get back down to those zero rates of behavior. Okay, so an extinction burst is just when you have a behavior that was previously reinforced and we removed attention from it, or reinforcement from it, if we're talking about attention, pops back up and gets reinforced again. So in Johnny calling out on the rug for attention, now we never respond to him unless he raises his hand. So his hand raising is just going up because he wants attention. So now he has to raise his hand to get it. At first, he will do this. So if you set this new plan in place where he only gets attention if he raises his hand, at first what he might do instead is start calling out more or getting louder. And this is an extinction burst. It happens because they're trying harder, and sometimes they'll engage in the preferred behavior, and then this behavior will come back again, and they'll try it out. It's like when you go to the grocery store. Okay, you go to the grocery store, you have your cart full, you get it all on the conveyor belt, and then you go to pay, you take out your credit card, and you insert it, or you tap it, or whatever it is that you've done 1,000 times, and it doesn't work. And you know there's money in your account. You know this card is working. You just use it somewhere else. It's totally fine. So you don't immediately go, oh, this one doesn't work. Let me try something else. Nope. You jam that card in there harder. You smack it on the thing harder. You start to get escalated. You remove it out. You put it back in 5, 6, 7 times. You start yelling at the machine. You might yell at the clerk. You, my friend, in those moments, and we've all been there to a certain degree, are experiencing your very own extinction burst. Our kids do it too, which is why we need to remember that we as the adults need to remain consistent, even if the behavior gets worse. Because if we remain consistent, over time the behavior will fade away and the preferred behaviors will take its place. You can't teach kids in isolation. It truly is and should be a team effort. You know what they say about a village, and teachers are a big part of that. And I bring this up because you have colleagues that you work with that can help you. You can talk to parents, they can help you. You can all work together. And if you're trying to figure out what in your classroom or in your group or in your own behavior needs to be changed and you can't think of anything or you're not sure, call on some of your team. Call someone from an outside place to come in and spend an hour in your classroom and just watch and take notes and then give you some feedback. Call your colleague next door to do that. Take a video of your classroom, with permission, of course, and show it to someone else that's working at the same time. Maybe after school you guys meet and be like, can you watch this? Like, what's going on here? Work together to solve those problems. And don't be scared to do that. When I was still teaching, I had people come in and watch me all the time because even though I know these science things and I know about behavior, sometimes when you're in it, you don't realize that you're reinforcing certain behaviors when you shouldn't be. And you don't realize that you're repeating prompts multiple times because you're just in it. So sometimes you need someone outside to come in and help you out, which is great. Team effort. It's the best thing we can do to help our kids. And all of this work and teamwork really does create beautiful results at the end of the day and is why we do what we do when you work with kids. And teachers are so important, and it's hard work, but it's great. Beautiful results. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me talk about some introduction to behavior. Please feel free to reach out at any time. You can get my contact information here or a link on our YouTube page. Take care.